In today's video, I survived 400 days in hardcore Minecraft, continuing my 100-day series. I go on to make even more progress on my villager trading hall, build a bunch of new farms, find my first ever ancient city of this world, and build something that completely transforms my main area. Now with that said, let's get into the story of how I survived 400 days in hardcore Minecraft. Here we go, day 301, I'm back in my world. Well, actually day 300 still. So, the first thing I did was play around with my render distance a bit until the frame rate was looking pretty smooth. Then I went ahead and did my usual fly around to refamiliarize myself with the area, but this time at night, because the glowing effect I built in the last video just looks so cool. Then I went to bed. Alright, day 301, I woke up and let's actually start the video. I jumped straight into things. As you see in the last video, I used a whole bunch of my totems and was actually out. So I made my way over to a nearby pillager tower I knew of, where I then looted it, which got me my second horn of this world, and flew around a bit until eventually a pillager captain spawned that I then killed to give myself the bad omen. Also, if you're wondering why this thing is on fire, it's because of a lava pool. Definitely not because I lit it on fire like 10 seconds ago. Anyway, I then started flying around the area until eventually I found a village that I then landed in and started the raid. Now obviously the raid didn't actually take too long, as I'm pretty overpowered with my tools and armor by this point, and with the use of my bow and the help of my iron golem friend, it wasn't long before I was killing the last couple of mobs of the raid and I got hero of the village. With that great success and my inventory looking much better on totems now, I started making my way back over to my house, which was a decent couple blocks away, but didn't take me too long nevertheless. When I got there, I went straight to my ender chest and started organizing a little bit, as it had become a serious mess. I then went to my trophy room and added the horn to my item frames, and then went to go check on my carrots and potatoes, which had produced a really decent amount of them by now. Since I was there, I decided to grab a whole bunch of them that I then went and traded with my villagers, getting me nearly an entire stack of emerald blocks just on that one day, which definitely brought my emeralds up to a really decent amount now. While I was over there by the villager hall though, I definitely noticed this terrible ugly looking floor here, and decided that it was probably time I changed it. So I grabbed a whole bunch of emerald blocks out of my shulker block and then started filling in an outline in the floor. However, I very quickly ran out of emerald blocks, but luckily I had all those ones in my house. So I quickly went and collected them all from my chest and then made my way back over to the villager trading hall, where I went ahead and finished the outline in the floor. Now I didn't fill in the middle as there was something else I wanted to do there, but it was going to take a decent amount of resources and I didn't really have a bunch of glass. Luckily, I did have a decent amount of sand though that I didn't have any furnaces to put in. So I decided that it was time I finally built a super smelter, as it was something I wanted to do for a while now. So I grabbed all the things and started counting it out in my kitchen. However, I noticed that the kitchen was going to be a little bit small for what I wanted. So I tried upstairs, but after counting out the blocks here, I decided that this was also going to be a bit small too. So since I didn't really know where I was going to be putting this thing yet, I just continued gathering resources, one of which was a bunch of wood, as I was going to be needing to craft a whole bunch of hoppers for this farm. When I was eventually done chopping down all those trees, I'd collected a whole bunch of wood that I then crafted into chests and used it to make some hoppers. I then collected the rest of the resources I was gonna need and went outside to see if there wasn't an area I could put it out here. However, after looking around for a little bit, I decided that I'd prefer for it to be in my home. So I placed all my materials into a shulker box and stole a beacon from my golden beacon that I then placed right next to my house and equipped it with haste 2, as it just wasn't close enough to give me haste 2 when it was sitting on top of the gold beacon. I then made my way inside and started digging out a staircase under my original staircase. I mentioned this in 200 days when I first built this house, that if I ever needed more space, I would just dig a staircase under here. And yeah, I definitely need a little bit more space to build this thing. Once I was happy with the size of the tunnel that was down there, I started clearing out more of a space for where this thing was going to be going. So I started digging out this tunnel by extending it long ways and then upward, and then when it was finally big enough, I went ahead and cleared out my inventory and then grabbed all the resources I was going to need to build this thing back out of the shulker box and got to building. The building process was going pretty smooth at first, as it's not the most difficult farm to build, but I did build it one too many blocks sticking out into the hallway. So sadly, I had to go ahead and tear the whole thing down. Luckily, it didn't take too long though, and as soon as I was done, I got straight back to building the farm, this time in the correct position though. For those of you who don't know how this works, it's pretty simple. It's just a bunch of hoppers leading into furnaces that then have a whole bunch of rails on top of it that you place some hopper minecarts on top of that'll go back and forth with some powered rails and collect items from these two chests, distribute them into the furnaces, and then drop them off into the chest in the bottom here again, where I can collect them once they're smelted. Once I was done building the farm, I went ahead ahead and decorated the front a little bit just by adding a couple of bricks and making sure to add stairs above the chest so that I'd still be able to open them. Now since that was done, the rest of the area was looking pretty plain, so I started by adding some stairs to the roofs and to where the staircase was going to be, and made sure to label the chest of the farm so that I never got that wrong either. And then I added a whole bunch of coal to the chest, as well as throwing all my sand into the top one, where I then turned the farm on and let it start smelting, which was working great. While I was waiting, I continued decorating the hallway, first by digging out the wall and replacing it with spruce logs on the right hand side, and then I dug out the opposite side wall and started filling that in with some spruce planks. Once I was done, I decided to break a couple holes in the wall that I then placed a couple of lanterns in to make sure it was nice and bright down here so no mobs would spawn. Then I quickly went ahead and finished part of the floor with the stone brick and andesite design, and by this time all the sand I'd put into my super smelter had in fact successfully smelted. I then went ahead and cleared up my inventory and grabbed myself a shulker box or two and headed over to a nearby desert to collect some sand. When I got there though, I first went ahead and looted the world's richest hay village and then collected myself a whole bunch of cactus that I was gonna need. Then I made my way back home, and then this is when I realized that I'd come back home without collecting any sand at all. So I decided to just go to bed on day 305, and on day 306 I headed straight back to the desert, which was about 1,000 blocks away, where I then mined up a whole bunch of sand until I had filled just over 2 shulker boxes, and I started making my way back home. When I got back home, I went ahead and added those shulker boxes and the leftover sand straight into my sand chest, and then quickly went to bed on day 306. When I woke up on day 307, I immediately headed out of my house and collected a bit of water and started the process of building a brand new farm. I was gonna need a whole bunch of green dye, so I decided today I was gonna build a quick little cactus farm in the one corner of my area. However, this quick little cactus farm turned out to be not such a quick little cactus farm. I didn't use any specific design for this one, just the most simple design you can find. However, cactus farms generally do take a long time to build because they are so awkward to build. You have to place all these weird little fences in between the blocks, and then you have to go ahead and place all the sand on top of the blocks, and after a day of building, I had only gotten about 1 layer done. Nevertheless, I continued cracking on with the farm and was able to get the second layer done within the second day of building. However, this farm didn't have a storage system yet, so I quickly went ahead and added a chest with a hopper in the back just so I'd actually be able to collect all the cactus that was falling. Then I went ahead and added the remaining cactus that I had, and while waiting for more of it to grow, started doing the design for the outside of the farm. I went for a pretty simple design by using some spruce logs for some pillars in the corners, and then used some upside down stone brick stairs with some glass on top, and on top of that put even more stone brick stairs, another layer of deep slate brick blocks, and then some annoying to place upside down stone brick stairs, which made a really cool design. Kind of looks like a pickle jar, so I really liked the way it was looking. Not because I like pickles, but I think it looked really cool. So I quickly went ahead and finished up the second layer by adding all the cactus that had now grown onto the top of the sand, and then I was ready to call that farm done. Well, at least for now. So I made my way inside, where I went ahead and organized my inventory and grabbed a whole bunch of sand to put in my super smelter to start smelting before I started gathering all the materials I was going to need to build the next farm in my world. Luckily, most of these materials I already had or had in my chest and was able to craft, so it didn't take me too long, and after collecting up all my glass from my super smelter, crafting it into white stained glass, and then putting it into the shulker box, I actually had everything I was going to need to build this new farm. However, there was something that I wanted to get done first. You see, in the last video, I found a zombie that spawned naturally with full diamond armor, who I trapped and then asked for some name suggestions. So, I'd like to give a big shout out to Shyla Stinton for the name suggestion Lucky Boy, as that's the name I've chosen. So, with that said, he was definitely going to need a new place to stay, and obviously since he was super rich, I made it out of only the best, some diamond and some gold blocks, with some gold blocks around the outside and some diamond blocks in the middle. Sadly, this didn't mean that I had to mine up a couple more diamond ore than I originally thought, but that's fine, it didn't really make a difference whether it was blocks or ore anyway. For the roof, I made an outline of gold blocks, and then I made my way over to the nearby ocean monument, where I went ahead and mined myself a couple of sea lanterns and then brought them home and used that to light up his room. From there, I went ahead and marked down the coordinates where I was going to be digging to let him through, and then made sure to close up most of his enclosure with glass, as well as digging a way out so that I'll be able to trap him when I get him here. Then I made my way over to where he was staying and checked on him before going ahead and mining the tunnel all the way to where he was going to have to end up. Once the tunnel was mined, I made sure to block in the staircase so that he wouldn't escape if things went wrong, and then I mined him out of his enclosure and brought him all the way over to his new house. I went ahead and tried to trap him. However, the first time it didn't go so well, but the second time I was able to easily trap him in, where I was then able to quickly go ahead and get myself a name tag that I renamed Lucky Boy and finally gave him his name. So once again, thank you so much for the name. Now that he was fully trapped in there and safe, I was able to open up the staircase again and get back to building that other farm. So when I woke up on day 311, I grabbed all the other things that I thought I may need in order to build this farm, mined up my shulker boxes, and started heading off to look for a place to build this this farm. Now, I know I haven't really explained what I'm building yet, so let me explain. I'm actually going to be building a really simple raid farm, just to make sure that I'm never going to run out of totems again. Usually, these things are built right next to a pillager outpost in the sea. However, that pillager outpost was nowhere near the sea, and all the villagers nearby were also nowhere near the sea, so that wasn't going to work. So after looking around for a bit, I decided to make my way back to the pillager outpost, as I had a different idea. You see, on top of the pillager outpost, I went ahead and built myself a nether portal that I then lit and made my way on through. When I got to the other side, I made sure to mine up the entire nether portal, and then I made my way up to the nether roof, where I went through the bedrock and built a new portal there that, after lighting and going back through, connected perfectly to the one on top of the pillager outpost. So with that great success, I made my way back to the nether roof and went over to the original hole I made in the bedrock that I then used to make my way back down to my portal and over to my house. When I got through the portal, I went ahead and flew off to where I was going to want to be building the actual raid farm. I decided I was going to build it near this village here by my gunpowder farm, as I knew the villagers were there and it was nice and close to the sea too. So with that said, I made my way into the sea and decided exactly where I was going to be building this thing, by building the area where the villager was going to be standing. From there, I made my way back over to the village and then put a villager in a boat and took him over to the sea, where I then rowed him all the way over to where he was going to be staying for the rest of his life. When I got there though, I broke him out of the boat and he disappeared. But I did decide that it was probably a glitch, so I paused my game, saved and quit the title, and then when I reloaded the world, he was actually there again. So I was able to break him out of his boat, and this time was able to successfully trap him into the area where he was supposed to be. From there, I got to building the farm. This was going pretty well at first, as the tutorial for this farm is really good, but I then realized that I built the farm in actually the wrong chunks. So I had to make my way all the way to the top of the water stream, where I then got to tearing the whole thing down again, which was lost, so it definitely took a while. When I eventually got to the bottom though, I was able to get the villager into the right position, and then I put on my building cap and got to doing some serious building. And there we go, I now had a raid farm in my world, and it was definitely going to save me a lot of time when I had to get totems or anything else again. Now, the farm was pretty much done, however, the last thing I still needed to do was build a portal that connected on the nether roof. So I quickly went ahead and built a 3x3 portal and made sure to spawn proof it so no raiders could spawn when I used the farm. And then I went through, broke the portal, made my way up to the nether roof, and built a new portal there that once again perfectly connected with the one there at the raid farm. Once I was done with that, I quickly made my way back to the nether roof and then back over to my house, where I dropped off a bunch of materials that were left over, and then made my way over to the raid farm in the overworld so that I could stop at this cow here and milk the absolute life out of him, because I was going to be needing a bunch of milk. You see, although this farm is great, one of the only downsides of it is that you have to drink milk at the end, otherwise you end up with a bad omen even when you come home and you're done using the farm. Anyway, I then made my way over to the raid farm and through the nether portal, and then over to the nether portal that takes me to the pillager outpost, where I killed the pillager captain, and then made my way back through the nether over to the raid farm. As soon as I came to the portal, the raid started as expected. So I made my way straight up to the top of the raid farm, where I stood there and waited for a million raiders to spawn all at once. If you've never seen this before, this definitely is a pretty dang cool sight. Essentially, what this farm does is it spawns all the levels of the raid at once. Now, to be honest, I don't 100% understand why it does this, but the creator of this farm has an absolutely amazing tutorial where he explains all of this stuff. So, if you guys would like to build this farm for yourself or learn more about raids and whatever, go check out his video. That'll definitely be linked in the description down below. Anyway, I just went ahead and continued using the raid farm for the rest of the day, just watching all the millions of raiders spawn and then killing them as soon as they drop down. So I continued doing this for the rest of the day until eventually I decided to drink a milk bucket, and then I headed back to the nether and then back through my portal to my house, where I then went ahead and went to bed. When I woke up the next day, I started by crafting a couple of different colored shulker boxes and using it to organize my ender chest, which definitely made it look way cleaner. Then I went over to my villager trading hall and started doing some more progress there. First starting by placing down all the spruce logs and then going around and stripping them all, which definitely made the place look a lot more complete rather than having half of them missing. From there, I continued moving villagers in, as I didn't get them all in last time. Now, to be honest, there's not much of an interesting way to show doing this, because I mean, it's literally the same process of pushing them along, breaking them out of their minecarts, and then just repeating it over and over again. So I essentially just continued doing this until eventually I got to the point where I had no more grown villagers. So after moving that last villager in, that left me with only 6 more empty slots for me to have to fill, meaning I was nearly done with this thing. While I was waiting for more villagers to grow, I decided to start making a path that I then covered with some dirt and used to start luring zombies in. If you watched the previous video, you've probably seen more than enough of this, so once again I'm just gonna kinda cut to when I'm done with this. When I was finally done trapping in all the zombies I could for now, there was only one more villager who had grown, which was kind of a shame, but I decided to move him in anyway. Then, while waiting for even more villagers to grow, I went ahead and made my way over to my gunpowder farm, where I then went ahead and sat AFK for a little while, because I had been running low on gunpowder. When I was eventually done AFKing, I made my way down to the storage system, where I'd collected a really decent amount of gunpowder. So, I grabbed it all and made my way back home, and then using some sugarcane from my sugarcane farm that I built last time, I crafted myself a whole bunch of rockets. Then, while waiting for villagers to grow still, I decided to do some more work on my villager trading hall. First of all, I extended the wall up on all the sides till it was even, and then decided to start building the roof for it, which looked pretty plain, but it definitely looked a lot better than just having no roof at all. Then I was able to move in yet another villager, and then I built the roof on the opposite side, which was looking much better now that at least both sides had a roof. Then finally, I went ahead and moved in the last villager, and after breaking his out of his minecart, I could go ahead and move in the last zombie, which meant that this place was essentially done. Well, except for the exterior, of course. Anyway, I just got to cleaning up the mess that I had made to build this thing, starting with this ugly rail that had been here for so long, and then even finishing off the entrance to the trading hall. Now by this point, I was wanting to make even more progress on the villager trading hall, but there was something I wanted to take care of first. You see, when I was down by Lucky Boy earlier, I realized that he could hit me through the glass, and with the thorns on my armor, that could definitely cause for a problem later on. So I went ahead and I decided to trap him in a boat, and then I mined up all the glass planes I had placed there earlier, and replaced them with glass blocks. Then I could break Lucky Boy out of his boat, trap him in there safely, and now I could continue with other things with a clear conscience. The first of those things being finally closing back up this road that had been annoying me for so many days now. Then I made my way back to my house, where I grabbed a whole bunch of cobbled deep slate, crafted into slabs, and got to building the rest of the roof of the villager trading hall. This wasn't a specifically difficult thing to do, as it was essentially just shifting and placing slabs. So eventually I did get it done, even though it was a fairly painful process. By this point, the roof was looking still pretty plain, but I decided I would move on to the thing that I wanted to put in the middle. See, I was wanting to put a tower in the middle, like I mentioned in the previous video. So I started work on it, and eventually got to a shape that I was happy with. Then I started mining out all the slabs underneath where the blocks were, and then I went ahead and decided to add the roof to the front of the villager trading hall. I just went with a really simple upward design, and it looked pretty cool. So cool in fact that it actually inspired me to start working on the other roofs to see if I can make them look a little bit better. I first decided to try this hangover design with some extra slabs, but it didn't look very good. So eventually I decided to try a new design by adding a point to the top of these roofs too, which definitely looked pretty cool. So I went ahead and added it to the other side, and now the only thing left to do was to connect it to the roof. So that's what I got to doing. I started connecting it to the roof, which took a little bit of figuring out, but eventually when I came up with an idea that I was happy with, I decided to remove this ugly dirt because it was in my way. But then, now that I was happy with the new idea, I went ahead and finished it off on the first side, and then when I was done with that, I made it over to the second side and did the exact same thing too. And now the roof was at least looking a bit more interesting. Now, I did want to do some work on that tower in the middle, however, I was going to need a whole bunch of wood for it. So I made my way inside, where I grabbed some saplings and some bone meal, and then went just outside of my wall where I built that beacon earlier, and grew myself a couple of trees that I then flew to the top of and chopped down. When I chopped down all of the trees, I'd collected a whole bunch of wood, so I made my way back over to my villager trading hall, where I decided to extend these side pillars up a little bit on all the corners, and then I started getting to work on the middle tower. First by extending it upwards by a couple of blocks, and then when I was happy with the way it was looking from the top, I mined up the original blocks, mined up a little bit more wood because I had run out, and then went to the inside of the villager trading hall and started extending it downwards until it met the roof in a way I was happy with. Now by this point, I was pretty tired of doing work on the villager trading hall, but there was one more thing I wanted to do before I was going to call it quits for now. So I went inside and grabbed a couple more blocks, and then I made my way over to the 4 towers on my villager trading hall, where I decided to build these little watchtower slash like torch designs. I'm not exactly sure what they are, but I think they look pretty cool, as you'll see in a second. And yeah, I think it just makes it look a little bit more complete. However, obviously, like I say, I don't actually know what they are, so if you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear it in the comments down below. Now that I'd built those 4 towers, I was happy to take a break from the trading hall for a bit. Now if you guys watched my last video, you know that I spent about 20 days searching for an ancient city. However, sadly couldn't find one. But that means that I decided that in this video, I was going to find one no matter what it took. So I grabbed a couple shulker boxes as well as a couple rockets and then started flying off. I decided to go in this direction because it's a direction that I hadn't done much exploring in, or at least not before I updated my world to 1.19. So I figured if there's any chance of there being an ancient city close to me, it's probably in this direction. So I flew off for a little bit and it didn't even take me long before I was able to find a snowy peaks biome. So I landed on top and started digging down. The first time I dug down and I did see some deep dark, however it was just that, only deep dark. But I landed on the second mountain, started digging down, and then I fell into this massive cave, which after doing a tiny bit of exploring was able to see an ancient city right away. This was like absolutely crazy. Literally last video was 20 days of searching, which in real life is like 4 hours. So that was really annoying, but by this point I was just happy to be here. So I stocked up on a couple extra totems in case things went south, marked down my coordinates, and hopped into the ancient city to do a little bit of looting. I started by collecting myself a little bit of wool just to make sure that I'd have blocks to move around with, and then started doing the looting. However, the looting didn't actually last too long, as after being down there for a little bit I decided to make my way out, since I had earlier discovered that the texture pack I used so that you guys can actually see in caves full bright kind of messes up the warden's blindness effect. So I didn't actually want to be cheating this. So after making my way out, I went ahead and marked the entrance of where this place was going to be, as well as marking down the coordinates, and then started flying my way back over to my house. As soon as I got there, I went straight into my house and changed my auto brewer to the right ingredients so it would be automatically brewing night vision potions, and then turned it on and started waiting. After seeing that I was in fact successful, I stocked up on a couple other things that I thought I may need, including an efficiency hoe so that I could mine some of the skulk up, and I even repaired my bow in case I really needed to use it. Then I grabbed myself a couple of night vision potions and flew my way back over to the ancient city. It didn't take me too long, and when I got there I was able to easily spot the entrance. So I went over to the entrance, where I then went ahead and walked down this dark scary hole, drank myself a night vision potion, flew down into the ancient city, and got to doing some serious looting. And there we have it, one very successful ancient city looting later, and I was ready to make my way back home. This was a really great session, as not only did I get a Swift Sneak 3 book, but I also got 2 Swift Sneak 2 books which I could combine, which was great, as that's pretty much the only reason I wanted to make it to an ancient city. When I got back home, I started by putting all the things I'd gathered into my chest, and then went straight ahead and added Swift Sneak 3 to my pants, finally maxing out my armor completely. I then went ahead and put the pants on, and tested it out right away, which is crazy fast by the way, like seriously, and if you run and sprint you go even faster. So I'm really happy with this enchantment. Well done, Mojang. I then went ahead and combined my 2 Swift Sneak 2 books to make Swift Sneak 3 if I needed it later on. And then I grabbed a whole bunch of lecterns and started making my way over to my villager trading hall. If you guys saw last video, you may already know that I have a whole bunch of librarians that are selling me a bunch of different books. However, sadly I didn't have all the ones I wanted yet. So I went over to the trading hall and started by naming all the villagers that I already had with the books they were selling me. And then went over to the opposite side and started placing down a whole bunch of lecterns to turn these guys into librarians too. They were struggling to take their job, so I had to continue mining up the lecterns and placing them back down again until they eventually gave me a trade that I liked, where I would then lock it in and rename the villager up above. I continued doing this for the next couple of days, which was an extremely painful process, but eventually, by day 338, I'd mined over 1,000 lecterns, and I was finally finished with all the villagers on this side, which was great, because it meant I had a much wider selection of books now. Speaking of books, after putting these leftovers into my chest, I went ahead and mined up a whole bunch of bookshelves to get myself some books, and then did some trading with my farmers to get some more emeralds, and went ahead and bought a whole bunch of different books for armor, that I then went ahead and put in this chest with this new set of diamond armor. I was essentially just going to add it to this armor in case one of my pieces ever broke, then at least I'd have a backup set. I also went ahead and maxed out my trident with some enchantments I bought from my villagers, and then I took all my books, all the armor pieces, and headed to the nether, where I then made my way up to the nether roof, and then eventually over to the gold farm, where I sat there and using the levels, went ahead and combined all the books and put them onto my armor, which meant that I had a brand new set of backup armor in case mine ever broke. Since I was here, I also decided to shoot a zombie pigman and do a little bit of AFKing for some levels, and fix up all my other tools. Once I was done with that, that, I quickly made my way back through the nether and over to my house, where I then went to bed. Now, as you may already know, I do already have a couple of beacons in my area here, but sadly, although they're great, they don't give me all the effects over all of my area. If I stand by the back walls, I lose the effects after being here for a little bit, and I definitely wanted to change that. Now, obviously to do that though, I would need a bunch more beacons, and although in the past I have gone to the fortress and just killed wither skeletons manually, that is a heck of a pain. So I decided to start gathering some materials to build myself a new farm, which included a bunch of random items, such as some cobweb, some carved pumpkins, and even a whole ton of obsidian too. Yep, that was a pain to gather. Another thing that I also needed a lot of was nether bricks. So I quickly made my way to the nether and mined up a whole ton of that, and after collecting just about 18 stacks, I started flying around the nether looking for a fortress where I could build this farm. Now, as you may have guessed by now, this is a wither skeleton farm, and so I was looking for the right fortress to do it at. Essentially, it just needed to be in a soul sand or basalt biome with a decent amount of space around it. If you guys have seen my videos in this world before, you may already know that I have one that I usually go to. However, the problem with that one is it didn't really have much space around it, so I had to search for a new one, which took me about 2 days of flying around the nether until eventually I came across this one here, which had a nice big open crossroad with a high area above it. So after a bit of consideration and deciding that this was in fact where I wanted to build the farm, I broke the nearby blaze spawner, got rid of some of the other blaze that were flying around, hit start recording on the replay mod, and got to building my wither skeleton farm. And there you go, the farm is now done. This thing is extremely great for the amount of time it takes. It literally took me like 2 or 3 days in my world. So if you want to build it for yourself, the tutorial will obviously be in the description down below, and I would actually highly recommend it. It really does super well for the amount of time it takes. So I continued farming this thing for the next couple of days, until eventually I'd gathered a whole bunch of skulls, over a stack, as well as a whole ton of bones and coal too, that I crafted into both coal and bone blocks respectively. After gathering everything up from the chest that I had collected over the last couple of days, I went ahead and made my way back home. This actually took a little while, as it was about 4,000 blocks away in the nether. When I made my way back to my area, the first thing I did was uncraft a whole bunch of the bone blocks I just crafted, and add all the bone meal to my moss farm, so it would take longer for this thing to run out. Then I made my way to my super smelter, where I then went ahead and uncrafted all of my coal blocks and added it into the coal chest, which was definitely a really nice stock up. I even had so many bone blocks that I had to make its own separate chest for it. Then I went ahead and added my wither skeleton skulls to my valuables chest, and for anyone who was wondering, this is the amount of wither skeletons I've killed. Quite a few by now. Now, although I did have a whole bunch of wither skeleton skulls, and that was great, I was gonna need a whole bunch of blocks to be able to power all the beacons after crafting them. So I went ahead and grabbed myself a whole bunch of carrots and potatoes, and then made my way over to my farmers where I started trading with them. Now, the only problem with this is that although this was a really good trade, the potatoes did always work out more expensive, and I always had less potatoes, since when I built my carrot and potato farm, I actually only built 1 potato layer and I already have 2 carrot layers. So I was gonna need to change that. So I made my way over to my house and grabbed a whole bunch of blocks and materials, and then went over to my carrot and potato farm where I started mining out the roof and building the next layer of this thing. That was obviously going to be potatoes. Now, if you've seen the previous video, I did this in there, so you don't really need to see the whole process again. Also, while I was building this next layer, I decided to flip down all of my villagers and once again convert them to get the potato trades back to 1 emerald too. Once I was done with that, I continued building the farm, and after getting in my final villager in day 351, all I was left to do was to add the border on top of the glass, and then I decided to fill in the roof with dirt in case I ever wanted to extend this farm upwards again. And there you go, just like that, get another layer of potatoes on my carrot and potato farm. By this point, the villagers had in fact cured, but they hadn't restocked yet. So while I was waiting, I went ahead and checked on my cactus farm and grabbed a whole bunch of cactus that I then put into my super smelter, along with a whole bunch of sand that I put on to smelt. Since I was gonna need a whole bunch of emerald blocks, I decided that through the night I would make my way over to the pillager outpost, where I then flew around and got a pillager captain spawn that I killed, and then made my way over to the raid farm, where I sat there and farmed it for a bit bit to get myself some emeralds. I only did this for a day though, as after about a day of AFKing, I was only able to get about 8 stacks of emeralds, which is literally what I get from just trading once with all my villagers at home. So after that, I made my way back over to my house, and then made my way back over to my villagers, which had still not restocked just yet. So I figured it was probably since I wasn't in the area, and decided to go on with something else while I was waiting. Now what is that something else, you may ask? Well, this ugly half chopped off hill that's behind my house has been annoying me for a little while now. So I decided that it was finally time to get rid of it. So I quickly went ahead and started mining the entire thing up, which took me only about a day with haste 2 this time. And the ugly thing was finally out of the way, meaning that I didn't have to worry about it anymore. I then made my way back over to my villagers, which still had not all restocked yet. And so I figured it was just a problem with their composters. So for the ones that hadn't restocked, I went ahead and broke their composters and placed it back down to hopefully get them to choose their compost and restock again. So after doing a little bit more trading, I went ahead and grabbed all the glass and now green dye from my auto smelter and used it to craft myself a whole bunch of lime and green glass that I was going to use to fill in the middle section of my villager trading hall. However, the only problem with it is there was still a bunch of dirt in the way. So I went ahead and started mining all of that out, which actually took me a decent amount of time, as not only did I have to dig the whole thing down all 11 blocks, but it had to be 3 wide too. So eventually, after removing all of the blocks that needed to be removed, I went ahead and grabbed myself a whole bunch of gravel and a whole bunch of sand too, that I combined with some lime dye to make myself some lime concrete powder. I then made my way back over to the villager trading hall and started using the lime concrete powder to build all the walls. However, after not long, I very quickly ran out, so I had to make my way back over to my house, where luckily I did have a whole bunch more gravel and sand that I could once again combine with a bunch of lime dye to make myself a whole bunch more concrete powder, which this time was actually enough. I then went ahead and poured a whole bunch of water over it to convert it all to concrete, and then laid out a whole bunch of torches at the bottom and started filling in the glass layers. This was going pretty well, but as you can probably imagine, after not long I did eventually run out of glass. However, I wasn't too far from the top, so after crafting a little bit more glass, I got to placing the layers, and within no time was able to very quickly finish it all up. And this is the effect it makes. I'm sure some of you have probably seen this before, and it was probably a bit of a waste of time for me to do this in such a tiny area, but I still think it looks really cool nevertheless. I then went ahead and started doing a whole bunch more trading with my villagers, which by this point had in fact all restocked, which made the emerald trading way more efficient and got me nearly an entire stack of emerald blocks within just one trading session. Then, while I was waiting for my villagers to restock, I was standing on top of my gold beacon and looked over at my emerald one, where I realized that it was missing the 4 dragon heads like I had placed on the gold one. So with the fact in mind that I had been running low on shulker boxes lately too, I took this opportunity to grab myself a whole bunch of fireworks from my ender chest, make my way through the nether, over to the portal that takes me to the end, through the end portal, and finally through the end gateway, where I set my render distance to 32 chunks and got to doing some serious end looting. And there you go. After a couple of days of End City looting, not only had I collected myself a decent amount of iron, diamonds and gold too, but I had also collected more than enough dragon heads to place on all 4 of the pillars, and I had gotten my shulker box collection from looking something like this to looking something more like this. Now that I was done with that, I made my way back over to my villagers and started doing even more trading so that I could start working up all the blocks I was going to need to power all the beacons. After doing all the trading I can though, and they had locked up, I decided to make my way back over to my cactus farm, where I started doing even more progress on it. I didn't specifically need more cactus, but I figured I may as well work on it while I'm waiting for my villagers. So I went ahead and grabbed a bit of glass and even had to put some on to smelt, and then continue working on the cactus farm until eventually I was adding the cactus, which now put me at about 4 layers, producing way more cactus than I'd ever need. I then did even more trading, and by this point my emerald block collection was looking pretty good. Not anywhere close to the amount of blocks I would need, but still pretty good. It was at this point that it also hit me that I do have a whole bunch of wither skeleton skulls, but I was gonna have to kill all the withers to make them into beacons. So I grabbed my skulls, went to the nether and collected a whole bunch of soul sand, and then made my way over to the end, where I started digging an area under the end portal so I could trap and kill the wither there. Now this is something I have actually already done in past worlds of mine, but I figured that I should probably still watch a tutorial. However, after watching a tutorial, I still managed to place the obsidian in the wrong place, meaning that as soon as I spawned the wither, he did in fact get stuck at first, which gave me hope, but then when I hit him, he escaped right away. So it was a bit of a pain to kill the Wither in the end, but after I started hitting with my sword, it wasn't long before he was dead. I then made my way back under the end portal and noticed the mistake that I had made, and then quickly went ahead and mined up some of the obsidian and fixed it. And this time when spawning the Wither, he did in fact get stuck, meaning that I was very easily and quickly able to kill him. So I continued the process of spawning and killing Withers until eventually I realized that there was a much faster way I could be doing this. So I quickly made my way back over to my house, where I crafted myself a diamond axe, bought a Smite 5 book from my villagers, and then added that Smite 5 to my axe. Now, Smite 5 for a Wither is something that I did actually already know about, but in the last video of this series, someone did leave a comment telling me about it. So shout out to you, thanks for trying to help me, my dude. Anyway, I then made my way back over to the end, where I then continued the process of spawning and killing Withers, this time much faster with my Smite 5 axe, until eventually I killed all the Withers and gathered myself 26 nether stars. While I was here in the end, I also decided to make my way up to the top of one of the obsidian pillars and mine a whole bunch of it down, since I was going to be needing it to craft all the beacons later anyway. Once I was done collecting all the obsidian that I was going to need, I made my way back through the end portal and over to my house, where it had already become nighttime, so I quickly went to bed. When I woke up the next day, I immediately made my way back over to my house, where I went and collected all the glass that was in my super smelter and combined it with the obsidian and the nether stars to craft myself 26 beacons, which I have no blocks to power at all. But I guess the beacons were at least made now. So I then made my way back over to my cactus farm and used some of the glass I had just collected to do even more building on it, and then went ahead and did even more trading with my villagers, as well as deciding to add 2 more composters to the villagers 2 over, which would mean that I would actually be able to get a stack of emerald blocks per day. So I quickly went ahead and locked their trades in, and then went ahead and mined up the beacon I had stole earlier and placed next to my house, and put it back on top of the gold beacon so I could have all the effects again. Now moving on to the next project of this video. For those of you who are new here, you may not know that I recently went ahead and made myself brand new channel art for my channel, giving it an entire makeover. Now in this new channel art, I have this massive rock, which I think looks extremely cool, and so it inspired me to build something like that in my world, since I think it could look really awesome in here. Now originally, I did plan to put it in this area where the ugly hill was behind my house, which is one of the main reasons I mined it up earlier. But after a little bit more looking around, I decided that it would be even cooler if I made it absolutely massive, to the point where it would take up this entire back wall. So with that in mind, I started gathering up a whole bunch of stony materials, such as stone, cobbled deep slate, tuff, and andesite, and then went to bed on day 363, woke up day 364, and with a rough idea of what I wanted in mind, I went ahead, clicked start recording on the replay mod, and got to doing a whole bunch of building. And there we have it, the main part of the rock had been built. Now I say the main part because although I do think it looked pretty cool like this, it still looked pretty plain and I definitely wasn't done with it yet. Now during that time lapse, I definitely did run out of stone a couple of times. So I made my way over to the nearby field where I fought the Wither in the first 100 days, where I built a beacon out of the emerald blocks that I had been collecting, and then equipped it with haste 2. And this is where I mined up most of the stone that I needed for that mountain. Well, that is until eventually I got tired of having to fly away to mine stone, and I built a really simple stone generator right next to my cactus farm, which was great, as not only did it mean that I could insta mine the stone, but I could also AFK for it if I needed to. Besides from building that, there were a couple of other things that did happen too. Like for example, I extended the storage system in the moss farm as it kept on filling up. I also had to make my way over to the ender farm a couple of times to heal up my tools, and I even went ahead and built a really simple auto composter in my house to get rid of all the unnecessary drops that the moss farm was giving me. But besides from that, everything that happened in the time lapse was what I was doing throughout those days. Now like I said, I wasn't quite done working on that massive rock just yet, so I had had to start doing some more progress on it. First bit of that progress being placing a water bucket at the top of the mountain and letting it flow down to create a waterfall, which actually flowed down perfectly first try. From there, I then went ahead and built a border around the water and then started filling it all in to make a nice little pond. Once I was done with that, it was looking a little bit strange with the border only being around the water. So I went ahead and filled in the rest of the moss one layer thicker all the way around this little island. Also added a couple higher areas on some of the places just to make it look less flat, and it definitely helped a little bit for now. For the next thing I wanted to do on here was actually to make a cave right next to the waterfall. So after planning out more or less where I was going to want to have it, I made my way down there and then mined out a cave of the mouth the way I was going to want it. When I was happy with the shape, I started filling in the inside with some cobble deep slate, which in hindsight I probably should have just used some normal deep slate, but the cobble deep slate doesn't look too bad either. The idea was to have it split off into two directions though, so I started by making the one on the left direction, which definitely is a bit of a pain to build. It's much easier to generate a Minecraft cave than to make it look natural yourself, but eventually after a bit of work and some odd block placements, I got it to a point where I was pretty happy with the way it was looking. I then made sure to light up the entire thing so no mobs would spawn, and continued building the rest of the cave, especially on the walls and the roof of the main area and the side cave, till eventually I got it to a point where I was pretty happy with it. Then when looking at the rock from the top, the cave did look cool, but the island was still looking pretty bland though, so I decided to add yet another elevated area on the one side of the island, which definitely helped a little bit. But from there I decided to make my way into my house, where I started gathering a whole bunch of materials that I was going to want to use to make that cave look a little bit more interesting, as well as grabbing 3 types of very special blocks. Then I made my way back into the cave and started doing some decorating using some fences, some soul lanterns, and some slabs and staircases of cobbled deep slate, which definitely helped it look a lot more natural. Now, as some of you may have noticed, there was a 3x3 hole at the end of the cave, so I quickly went ahead and filled it in with the 3 types of special blocks that I mentioned I grabbed earlier from my chest, which do have a purpose, but I'm not going to reveal that just yet, so you definitely can stay tuned for that in the future. Then when waking up on day 338, I went ahead and started flying around and looking for a cave where I can mine a couple of ores. Eventually, I did come across a pretty good cave where I was able to get some diamonds, some gold, and I was even able to break my way into an amethyst geode where I could mine up a couple of amethyst blocks and crystals too. Then I made my way back over to my house where I quickly went to bed and then started adding those new blocks to the cave, which made it look a lot cooler. Happy with the way that this side of the cave was now looking, I turned my attention to the outside of this rock. Firstly, starting by making it look way more overgrown. I started by adding a whole bunch of trees and rocks to the ground, and then I went ahead and built this little river that went straight down the middle connecting to that pond. Then I went ahead and added a whole lot of moss to the back of the rock and eventually built a path straight down the middle with a little bridge on top of it too. This definitely made it look way cooler and made it a really fun experience to be walking through. So now that I was much happier with the way the outside of the rock was looking, I went back inside my little man-made cave and started building the opposite side. This kind of call it a cave room was going to be much bigger than the one on the opposite side, as I planned to put something much bigger in it. So I got to work on it, and eventually after finishing the roof I was happy with the way the cave was looking, but there was something I wanted to do first before moving the thing I wanted to move in here in. See, if you look at my elytra here, it was getting extremely low. So I quickly made my way through the nether and then over to the gold farm, where I went ahead and shot a zombie pigman and then collected all the levels to heal up all my tools and my elytra. Once I was done doing all of that and collecting all the spare levels, I made my way back to my portal and then back over to that cave, where I added a couple of ores in to make it look a little bit better, and then went ahead and brought in what I wanted to bring in. Now originally I had planned to put my nether portal in here, so I started planning out the size that I wanted it to be, but after doing a little bit of planning I could see that it was going to look kind of strange in here, especially since I wanted to make the floor lava. So with that said, I decided to mine it all back up, which is kind of sad, but what it does do is it opens an opportunity for you guys to let me know what you would like to see me put in here. So please right now scroll down and go leave a comment telling me what I should do with this room. Now after doing all that work on this big rock, I was really happy with the way it was looking, and I think it made my area look extremely cool. So although this was really fun, I had to move on to something that was super exciting. Yep, you guessed it, I made my way over to my creeper farm, where I then went and sat AFK for the next couple of days. Yep, you see, over the last couple of days, I had been using a ton of rockets flying all around my world, and I think that the 2 that I have in my hotbar are possibly the only 2 I actually had at the time. So, although this is really boring sitting here, this does give you the perfect opportunity to go subscribe real quick. Have you done it? Yeah, I'm sure you've done it by now. Alright, let's just move on. When I was finally done AFKing on day 398, I made my way down to the storage system of this farm, where I found out that I had collected an absolute ton of gunpowder, and this was definitely going to be lasting me a long time. So with that beautiful gunpowder in my inventory, I made my way back over to my house, where I crafted myself a red shulker box and renamed it Rocket Box. Then took it over to my sugarcane farm, and using the sugarcane from my farm, combined it with a whole bunch of gunpowder to craft myself more than enough rockets to not only fill the shulker box, but plenty to fly around my area and to last me for the next takes a while. Now when recording this video, I figured that it would be a pretty boring way to end the video to just AFK at the gunpowder farm for the last couple of days. So I figured since I did find the first ancient city of this world in this video, I may as well fight the warden on day 400. So I went ahead and spent the next 2 days, day 398 and 399, preparing everything I would need to fight him. Now to be honest, there's not that much that you can really prepare for. So I decided to do a little bit more work on the cactus farm while I was waiting for day 400 to come around, and was able to add another layer which definitely made the farm look a lot more complete. Then by the time the sun was setting on day 399, I made my way over to the ancient city, where I landed in the entrance, turned Fulbright off, quickly went to bed, and woke up on day 400 to drink myself a night vision potion, spawn myself a warden, and get into possibly the most dramatic fight of this entire series. No. No, I did not. I pretty much just sat above him and rained down arrows until he eventually died. Yep. Yeah guys, I'm pretty scared of fighting the warden, and I don't think it's something that I plan to do for a long time still. So, with the skull catalyst that he had dropped, I made certain to take it back home and rename it so that I'd always remember our fierce battle, and then took this time to turn on some shaders and look over everything that we built in this video, including the new villager trading hall upgrades, the absolutely massive mountain we built, and the cave inside that looks extremely cool with these shaders on. But anyway, that was 400 days in hardcore Minecraft. Thank you guys all so much for watching, I really hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you all in a new video soon. Bye!